All right, in today's video, I'm talking about how to face difficulty, and I'm sharing 3 insights about how to deal with trials and grief and loss. We like talking about the positive things and about bigger, better, faster, more, pray, read the Bible, do the spiritual disciplines, do all the things. But when we face real questions, difficulties, disorienting things in our lives, what do we do with that? And how is that connected to our faith? Jesus wept, Jesus felt pain, Jesus experienced loss, yet none of this deterred his faith. None of it derailed God's plan. Jesus didn't just bypass the difficulties. He didn't ignore it because he had the more spiritual things to get on with. This is his way. So in my last video, I talked about finding hope even in the midst of trials and difficulty. And I talked about how the Bible points us towards the truth that trials and difficulty isn't something that is not going to be a part of our lives, something that we can just avoid, but that God intentionally, in his wisdom, includes this as a part of believers' lives. And so his invitation to us is to grow through them, go through trials and difficulty in steadfastness, perseverance, and hope. So of course, this is not easy. It's really hard to embrace difficulty in our lives. We don't like it. It doesn't feel good, but we can take comfort knowing that God works all things for the good of those who love him and who are called according to his purpose. So one of the things I talked about in the last video was something called walls. And you can use a different word if that's more helpful to you. But essentially, walls are something disorienting in our lives, a bigger crisis, a bigger trial, like the death of a loved one, a church split, a crisis of the faith, something in our lives that is really disorienting and disruptive. And it causes us to have a lot of questions about life, about God, about ourselves, about the church. And perhaps for the first time in our lives, even if we've been a believer for a while, it almost seems like my faith isn't working, or the things that I know to do, pray more, read the Bible, serve, all these things don't seem to be the answer, don't seem to be pulling me through. So what do we do? One of the things that happens at the wall is, we're left with the opportunity to decide, hey, do we want to, in our own strength, try to press through this? Or do we want to just back away from God and get bitter at God? Or do we just stay right there and stay stuck? And I think, unfortunately, one of the things that's common for believers to do is we get stuck right there. Because we maybe don't have a theology of how to grapple with difficulties of this kind. And so it either blindsides us or just derails us, and it truly is disorienting. So in today's video, I'm going to be talking about some ways that we can engage with Jesus when we come to a wall in our journey. If most people end up feeling stuck there, then we need solutions to what are we supposed to do when we come to walls in our life, in our faith journey. And I don't think it's intentional that believers want to get stuck there or to avoid them or to get bitter. But I think when we don't have a theology to grapple with this, then that's when that happens. We get stuck, we get bitter, whatever. And so we don't want to remain stuck there. So how do we engage with Jesus and allow him to pull us through it? So that's what we're going to be talking about today. Now, of course, there's a lot of other people out there who have more wisdom than me, more life experience than me. So if you know someone like that, then of course, talk with them and process with them the difficulty that you're going through. I think one of the main points that we're going to talk about is to actually name it and embrace it. You have to address it, not ignore it. But that being said, I just want to share my insights that I've gained, especially over this past year or two, as I've gone through some difficulties of my own and some things that have been very disorienting to me. So I just want to share 3 things that are some insights that can hopefully help you. I'm sure you have gone through some difficult things in your life, or you're in the middle of one right now, or you will go through others. in your life. And so I hope that it can just be an encouragement to you wherever you're at. Of course, every trial and difficulty is not A to A. It's not the same. It's unique. And that can be something that makes it so difficult, is that it's, unique to your experience and what's going on in your life. But as the body of Christ, we can be there for each other to listen and to share encouragement for each other. So I mentioned, there's plenty of other people wiser and with more life experience than me. One of those people is Pete Scazzero with Emotionally Healthy Discipleship. So I did want to reference a couple resources. One book is called Emotionally Healthy Spirituality. This book is great because it talks about how to integrate our emotions and grief and loss into our spiritual journey. It talks about things like silence and stillness and solitude and Sabbath, how that needs to be practices of our life. Kind of the main tag phrase is, it's impossible to be spiritually mature while remaining emotionally immature. So this is a great resource that I would encourage you to check out. It's great for people as individuals, churches, small groups, and I hope it could be a help to you. I'll link it in the description below. Another book, which is also by the same person, is called The Emotionally Healthy Leader. So if you are in any type of leadership or leading a group of people, especially if you're a pastor, this is a great resource. And it's some of the same principles from the other book, but also some new ones, and just goes a little deeper. So both these resources are great. I will link them in the description below so that you can find them on Amazon or just directly from his website. All right, so let's jump into 3 insights for facing the wall. Again, you probably have or are or will face walls in your life, and we need some insights and some theology around this so that we don't get stuck there. So the first insight is to actually embrace it. And what do I mean by embrace it? Is that we actually have to be able to name it. We have to be honest with ourselves and acknowledge it. In order to go on with Jesus and mature, we can't ignore it. We can't pretend like it didn't happen. And so this may seem simple, just simply to acknowledge it or be able to name it. But I think for a lot of people, myself included, this can be hard to do. And why? Because we often live under unspoken rules. We, have the shoulds and should nots, and usually they're unspoken in our lives or in our families or in our churches or in our communities or in our cultures. There's a lot of rules which are often unspoken. And sometimes that unspoken rule is, don't talk about hard stuff or don't name it, kind of sweep it under the rug, pretend like it didn't happen. And so that's not a good thing. We want to actually be able to acknowledge it, name it, be honest with ourselves, and say things as they are. But maybe that's not you. Maybe you don't have a problem acknowledging it. You can honestly say, this happened, this is challenging. But maybe it's harder for you to see how it is connected to your faith. And perhaps it even seems like something that is an attack against your faith. Often when hard things are happening, it can be easy to just kind of write it off in some more vague spiritual thing of like, it's just an attack from the enemy. And of course, the Bible tells us that the enemy is out to steal and kill and destroy. And so while it's not like that's never untrue, believers are often so quick to over-spiritualize things or just jump to that conclusion rather than having a more healthy biblical theology for difficulty and suffering and how God invites us to embrace that and learn and grow from it rather than just something to be powered through or prayed against or circumnavigated. So wherever we're at there, we need to go beyond acknowledgement into embracing it. So this includes naming it and acknowledging it, saying, this is actually what happened. I'm not going to ignore it. I'm going to face it. But then it also includes integrating it into our faith journey. So we must shift our perspective. Our lens needs to shift from, this is something to be avoided at all costs, to actually, this is something to be received and acknowledged. And difficulties are a normal part of believers' lives. So we could try to lie to ourselves and say, it's not that bad. Or we could also pretend like it could be avoided. Or we can act like it didn't really happen or kind of downplay it. Or we can just try to stuff it down completely and just move on. But, any of these options or combination of these options are being disingenuous and dishonest with ourselves. So we actually have to embrace it and learn to integrate it into our faith, into our lives, rather than avoid it. So instead of seeing the wall, which again is difficulties in our life that are very disorienting and confusing, it's not just your everyday small trial, it's something more monumental than that. But instead of seeing walls as a threat to our faith, we actually need to start seeing them as something divinely connected to the unique spiritual journey that Jesus has for us. And it's an opportunity to grow in Him and trust His sovereignty in our lives. So practically, how do we apply insight number 1 to actually embrace it, embrace the wall? We need to acknowledge it. Don't stuff it down, name it, talk about it, journal about it, process it with trusted friends, get professional counseling, don't try to power through it, be honest with yourself, and be honest with God. He can handle it. So this is not a rigid list of rules of one formula that you need to do or you even have to do. These are just some tips for how to actually embrace the wall. And they may seem simple, but they're hard, I think. So when we can actually name it, acknowledge it, talk about it, and not stuff it down, that's a big step number 1. So let your faith be strengthened through it and in the midst of it, rather than assuming your faith will be strengthened by trying to bypass it and pretend it's not a real thing. All right, so my second tip for facing the wall is to have patience. Lots and lots of patience. And this is not fun. This is hard. And I think sometimes for me, at least with this specific situation I've been in, the harder thing has almost been now the patience of walking it out and, the lingering grief, the lingering confusion, the lingering pain. I can say, okay, that thing that happened is painful in and of itself, but now this is even worse to be, for it to be dragging on this long. And one of the hard things about the wall is that the nature of it is that it can't just be powered through. It can't be fast forwarded through. So it's not just like, I need to pray more, or I need to read the Bible more, I need to serve more, or do all the religious things more, all the spiritual disciplines more. It's, I need to stick with Jesus patiently in the midst of this, and only in His timing and His way will He lead me through it. And part of that, is just hard things are hard, so they come with the byproduct of grief and loss and processing and pain that is going to carry forward. And so we do need to allow Jesus to transform us in the midst of that. We don't necessarily stay in the pain or grief, but at the same point in time, it's very real that difficult things, the loss of a loved one, a church crisis, a big health thing, would have lingering effects into our future that we can't just ignore. And so sometimes I feel like, I should have it all together by now, or I should feel better about this by now. But I think being in touch with grief and pain and loss is better than just like, oh yeah, everything's better now and forget that and move on. So I think Jesus in his kindness leads us patiently rather than just fast forwarding things for us. And that can be hard in the middle of it. But again, having patience is the second tip for facing the wall. And I can find some comfort from the words of Scripture in places like James 1 and Romans 5 that say the result of trials and testing is endurance and patience and steadfastness. So it's not just something I need to have patience, but patience is actually a fruit that God is producing in my life through the difficulty, through the wall. And it's a character that he's producing in me that I'm going to have even more of on the other side of the wall. So lots and lots of waiting, lots and lots of patience, steadfastness. That's our work at the wall. That's how we face the wall. So practically, don't rush. Don't force your way through the pain. Don't ignore the pain. Sit right in the middle of it with Jesus present there with you. It will probably be slower than we think. It will take longer than we want. Let Jesus work in his timing and his way. We can't make it through the wall by just trying harder, doing more, or being better. So I could say, I want to get through this faster, and I want all my dreams and desires coming true now. But I have to remember, God is not in a hurry. Or I could say, I want to do more. I want to be more, which are great desires, I think, but also remembering that God is not a slave driver and he's patient and he's kind and loving. Or I could say, I want to have it all together right now, but remembering that brokenness and contrition are of God and that he actually resists the proud. So sometimes maybe when we think we have it all together and have all the answers, maybe that's not a great place to be in, though it feels nice and feels like, man, things are going better in my spiritual journey. So while my dreams and desires to do more, be more, have it all together, be going places in my life aren't innately bad desires, right now I need to remember to patiently trust God, to rest in him, and to allow him to pull me through. Okay, my third tip for facing the wall is to embrace the unknown. And I really don't like this one. I like to have the answers and have things figured out, but I have to remember it's a normal part of life to have lots of questions and to not have all the answers, and remembering that I'm not supposed to, remembering that God is God and I'm not. God is God and we are man. So by all means, we should bring our questions before him. I'm not saying to not ask our questions or not be seeking for answers even, but perhaps we could actually find more comfort and hope knowing that we don't have to know everything. What if we found our hope in that rather than having our hope in, I have the answers, I can explain this difficulty. We can find comfort in knowing we don't have to know everything. Also, we don't have to feel threatened by things we thought we were certain about, but maybe now don't feel so certain about. I know in my life, this is hard. If something challenges either what I believe or what I thought, it can feel like a threat because, beliefs are tied to who we are. But I think a healthy sign of maturity and something that going through a wall produces in us is kind of this holy unknowing, or we can embrace mystery a little bit more. And so no matter our age, maybe we have some unlearning or unwiring to do. And hopefully we come out of the other side of the difficulty, the other side of the wall, with a greater appreciation for the unknown and for mystery, and even more compassion for others and their perspectives, and a greater trust in God's sovereignty. So practically, embrace the present. We can't always explain the past, and we can't always know the future direction. Sometimes it's like, oh, if the future is unclear, we can lean on our, firm foundation of the past. But what if also our past feels blurry or we can't explain things that have happened, well, I guess we have to embrace the present and find God right here. Also, don't try to have everything figured out. Remember, God is in control. Embrace humility. God is God, and we are man. We are not God. And He's in control. He's not in a hurry. And He invites us into embracing and acknowledging our walls. So these are 3 insights that I've learned in the past couple years. And by learned, I mean that I'm trying to actually not only know them in my head, but implement them in my life. But again, they're all easier said than done. But number 1 is to actually embrace our walls. That looks like naming it, acknowledging it, and integrating it into our faith. Number 2 is patience, remembering that God's not in a hurry, and our work at the wall is to hang with Jesus in the middle of it and to trust Him, grow in steadfastness, and trust His sovereignty and goodness. And number 3 is to appreciate the unknown, allowing God to be God and remembering that we are not God, we are not in control, and that we don't know everything. So I think these 3 insights, the point of them is that they help us have more healthy perspective of grief, loss, sadness, and pain. This doesn't mean we like it or enjoy it. That's not the case at all. But being able to acknowledge, embrace, and view it as something connected to our spirituality allows us to actually go on the journey of maturing. So simply by being willing to integrate these concepts into my theology allows me to have a more healthy perspective of difficulties and trials and suffering. And, things like grief, pain, and loss that don't often get categorized as spiritual things like prayer and church attendance and Bible reading, and grief and sadness and loss are kind of, we put them in this other bucket of non-spiritual, just hard things. But what would it be like to actually integrate that? Prayer, Bible, church, grief, loss, sadness, walls, pain, and loss, that's all a part of our lives. We can't ignore those parts. And so this is the path that Jesus has showed us. This is not a new concept. This is the path that Jesus showed us in His humanity. Jesus wept. Jesus felt pain. Jesus was patient. Jesus experienced loss. Jesus had what looked to be setbacks in His ministry. Yet none of this deterred His faith. None of it derailed God's plan. Jesus didn't just bypass the difficulties. He didn't ignore it because He had the more spiritual things to get on with. This is His way. And so we need to learn and grow in our ability to incorporate this into our journey, into our faith. So again, not new things I'm talking about from Jesus and throughout church history, but I hope these insights are helpful because maybe we don't always get a healthy theology for how to face walls taught in our church. Depends on your background, depends on your culture, your denomination, probably. But I think just generally, we like talking about the positive things and about bigger, better, faster, more, and pray, read the Bible, do the spiritual disciplines, do all the things. But when we face real questions, difficulties, disorienting things in our lives, what do we do with that? And how is that connected to our faith? And so hopefully by learning these things, we can begin to grow and bear good fruit, lasting fruit, and character as we endure with Jesus in this present evil age until He returns and we live with Him forever in a new heavens and new earth. He's going to make all things new. And so we have this hope to look forward to, that Jesus did not stay dead. He rose from the grave, but He also didn't just rise from the grave. He ascended back to heaven, but He's also not just staying in heaven forever. He is returning, and He is going to make all things new and bring His kingdom here. And Galatians 1 tells us that right now we live in a present evil age. So even though Jesus has paid for redemption, died on the cross, and we're believers, In him, in the new covenant, we're saved. We are also awaiting a salvation. Salvation is something that has happened. We've been born again, but we're also waiting for that salvation when he returns and renews the creation, renews the face of the earth, and redeems our bodies. This is what Romans 8 tells us. In this hope, we were saved. So we can patiently look forward to that in the midst of difficulties and trials. Okay, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.